Hello, I'm Robert. I help people scared about things, and I founded the Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked, to help people who are scared of many things. As we complement the many are also getting help from health professionals if they're really scared, and we complement with the debunks. So anyway, this time I'm talking about the way that the United States are reducing cases. That actually many of the US states are actually things looking much better in the United States than you might get the idea of from the news. All the news about second waves and blips. But several states are continuing to have a big reduction in cases. And this example is for Virginia. If you look at Virginia, then you can see what happened. That to take me off the screen for a bit. So the cases per day, they fluctuate a lot. Some days you don't get many reports, and then they get overrun into the next day and so on. If you look at the 7-day average, it's a much better idea. And you have weekends and stuff, much better idea. And you can see up to just before the start of June, then it was it's actually end of May. It was very high case numbers. There's a little bit of lag in the 7-day average. And then it's going down and down and down since then, about 3 weeks or more. So why has that happened? Because they eased lockdown. Well, the reason is that the main way that you stop COVID-19 is not through lockdowns. So that was very spectacular, the way that the Chinese stopped it in Wuhan with lockdowns. But what was far more important was the test, trace, isolate that was going on behind the scenes. That isn't so obvious. So in the main reason you have to do a lockdown is because you've lost track of where the virus is in your society. And you just don't know where it is. So you've got to assume that anyone might have it. So you just lock everyone down and you try and distance everyone from everyone in the entire society, whether they have it or not. And when you've only got a few thousand people or a few tens of thousands of people in millions of people, it's obviously very inefficient to separate all of those millions from everyone else. And all you really need to do is separate the few thousand who've got it from the ones who don't. So it's a very, very blunt tool. And that's the same reason why the Chinese did it. Now, many people do not realize, because it's amazing how we've had reinvention of history. I lived through the history like the rest of you did, but I paid a little bit more attention to what was going on. Because I listened to every single WHO announcement. People in our group got scared very early on, before the Wuhan lockdown, or the time of the Wuhan lockdown, the lead up to it, before it was happening properly. Then there were people in the group scared, and I was finding out about it. And at the time of the Wuhan lockdown, this had never been done in any country in the world. Nobody had ever shut down. Remember, Hubei province is as big as the United Kingdom. People often don't quite realise that. They think it's a little place. It's a big place. Same population as the United Kingdom, larger than California. And the Chinese have their total population is 4 times that of the United States. And many of their provinces are larger than California in population. And Hubei province is one of these very large population provinces. And the Chinese decided to lock down the whole of Hubei province. And very strict lockdown of the city of Wuhan. It's much bigger than New York, very big city as well. I think it's bigger. Population of, let's just double check that, population of Wuhan. $11 million, population of New York. 8 million. So they shut down a city that was bigger than New York. They locked down a city bigger than New York. They locked down a province bigger than California. And they did that very, very quickly. And it was the first time that any country in the entire world had done such a thing in response to a disease, or in response to anything indeed. Nobody had ever locked down. There were some lockdowns of cities, to a certain extent rather limited, to try and stop flu, which didn't work. And so it's no surprise that we got people in the United States saying, oh, that's excessive, that's not going to work, it's a totally stupid thing to do. It's just going to make it worse. These people are going to find a way through your lockdown. Even if they don't, it's totally immoral to shut down, to lock down an entire country. And so the Chinese got a lot of criticism. And then when eventually they discovered that it was actually working, then they got a lot of criticism again from the West saying, oh, but that's totally immoral. You mustn't do that. You must never lock down a country. You must never lock down a city. This just shows how China violates human rights and that sort of thing. And now we're all doing it. And so it's very, very hypocritical, the way that the West. And then finally we got Trump saying to China, you should have shut down Wuhan much earlier, and you should have shut down Hubei province much earlier. And it's your fault that we now have it in the world. It's rewriting history within months. It's really extraordinary. And back then, Trump himself was saying of the Chinese, he praised the Chinese for what they were doing. And now he's telling them that the entire US outbreak is the fault of the Chinese. And the Chinese, we've got to remember they were ordinary health workers in China. They're ordinary people. They're not part of the government. They're doing their job, they're saving lives. We've got 10,000 people who rushed into Hubei province and rushed into Wuhan, risking their lives. Some of them died, in order to save people who were dying of a disease that was very little unknown about it. They didn't even know how it was transmitted very well. And yet you got these health workers from around China, and they all flocked to Hubei province. Anyway, so the reason that China did this lockdown in Hubei province was to separate it from everyone else, because they didn't know where the virus was, and to locate it into Hubei province because they didn't want it spreading throughout the rest of the United States, or the rest of China. Now, this was very, very successful. If they'd done what the United Kingdom did and what the United States did, then by now every province of China would have a raging outbreak with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Indeed, they would have had millions of cases by now if they'd done what the United Kingdom did, or they'd been as slow in reacting as the United States did. But instead, with this very, very prompt action, then they now only have most of the provinces outside of Wuhan, outside of Hubei province, provinces as big as European cities, bigger than California, have only a couple of less than 2,000 cases, and many of them have only a few hundred, some have less than 100. The entire Tibet has only one case recorded. And even if it's a bit underestimated, people have got antibodies and so on, still, they did stop it. And people sometimes say to me, oh, this is all made up, the Chinese didn't really do that. But I think everyone is finally coming around to this point of view that yes, they did, because it would be absolutely obvious they can't have raging outbreaks like the United Kingdom and Italy and Spain raging throughout China and hidden from the rest of the world. It's far too open. We have too many people going into China, and we have people in China that we know in the West, friends in China and so on. It's just impossible. So yes, China did it. And so this is great. This is the problem with this rewriting history. So I'm not saying anything. Of course, China has huge human rights problems. Some other countries do as well. But on this particular matter, it is something very great and good for the world. It's very wonderful. And I think it's amazing what the ordinary people in China did for the world. They lived through all the things, and we get people in the West complaining about lockdown. China went through that in January, and they did that, and they had this very strong focus back then, that they were saving the rest of the world. So try and think, suppose in January, what had been happening in the United States now had happened in China in January. We wouldn't have had a chance. Nobody in the world. China was brilliantly equipped to deal with this because of its experience with SARS. Its hospitals have huge numbers of ventilators. They also have artificial lungs. They have a much better health system than they had just 20, 30 years ago. Their health system is up to the rest of the world. It's very high quality, and especially on this. Then one of the people who led the joint WHO China's response, Bruce Aylward, said if he had COVID-19, he would want to be treated in a Chinese hospital because they have the highest care there is, the highest quality intensive care that he knows of, I think, in Chinese hospitals for people with respiratory diseases. On that particular topic, they were brilliant. Now the rest of the world, especially United Kingdom, United States, we just were rubbish at that because we just didn't have much experience of SARS. So that is why you do a lockdown. So you do a lockdown in China to stop the virus, find out where it is in your society, separate everyone from everyone else, but then you should immediately start searching and looking for it. You should build up your capacity for intensive care units and your health, personal protection equipment and so on. So the United States have done that, the United Kingdom has done that. Some things they got very late, because although the United Kingdom are just very strange. They sort of say, oh, we know better than everyone else. We're not going to listen to what the Chinese did. We're not even going to listen to the Italians. We're going to work everything from scratch. And they get a lot of criticism from our own people in the United Kingdom about this attitude of the SAGE group. But in the United States did listen somewhat more to that. They did realise that the health system has to be protected very early on, and the care homes better than Europe, I think. And they did separate everyone from everyone else to do the lockdown. And then the United States. So the United States was very complacent. So Trump put in this travel ban with the United States, and then just laid back and sort of saying, oh, we know they're not going to come into the United States, we've got this travel ban. The WHO warned Trump that this is not enough, not Trump particularly, but the entire world, that travel bans are not enough unless you've got a comprehensive system along with it. And it should be limited duration and focused, targeted. And that's exactly what the United States found, that the virus found its way around the travel ban. So Trump is telling WHO, you should have told us earlier so we could have put in the travel ban earlier. But the virus got around the travel ban, that's the entire problem. It's not a problem of that they should have done the travel ban earlier. It's because they didn't have a ban. They only had banned people going from Chinese. People came from other directions. Some people would come through anyway and find ways through. The travel ban in the United States didn't prevent people who are Americans from returning from China to America. So you've got a big leak there anyway. Tens of thousands of people coming back from China just because they're American citizens. So no, the travel ban didn't do it. So that's why we got this situation. And then the CDC did this flawed test, and everyone knew it was a flawed test. And they were very, very slow at doing anything about it. It wasn't until March, about here, it wasn't until then that the United States, March back then, I'm being very stupid, until March, mid-March then, wrong place. March is between April and May. It wasn't until about then, right at the beginning of the outbreak, and these figures, that the United States started proper testing. Until then, March the 3rd, beginning of March, by then, the United States had only done, I think, 20 tests, average, per state. Because they had this flawed test that wasn't working very well, and they hadn't made it a top priority to fix it. So that is the problem then. So that is why we had the lockdown. So this is the background to help you understand, because of all this is why it's so hopeful now in the United States. You've got to understand the history and not rewrite history to understand why it's so hopeful now. So the reason it started going off like this is because you didn't do test, trace, isolate. If you had had test, trace, isolate working then you would be like Tibet. If you look at Vietnam, they've only got a handful of cases in Vietnam because they test trace very early, much like Tibet and some of the other provinces in China, because China being with its rather authoritarian way of governing, they were able to just roll this out over all the provinces. Provinces have no choice in this. They had to do it. We can't do that, obviously, in the West. But if we had had this rolled it out like the Chinese did, then we would have been able to stop it then. It just wouldn't have happened in the United States. We could have done what China did, but we don't have an authoritarian country, and we didn't listen to China. And so it wasn't until then we had the lockdown. The lockdown separated everyone from everyone else. That did control it. Without the lockdown, it's been soaring up to tens of thousands of cases a day. And so this is Virginia. Because of the lockdown, you kept it steady. And when it comes to then, what we had to do then was to increase the testing capacity. And this Trump did correctly. Trump made it a top priority to increase the testing capacity, did this very early on. That is, not early on compared with China, but early on compared with Italy and people, well, not Italy, compared with the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is only just recently, in the last few weeks, upped its testing capacity, and the US was much faster than the United Kingdom in that respect. So then you've got a big testing capacity, and then the tracing capacity. Again, the United States has been much faster than the United Kingdom in tracing as well. And it is tracing that has fixed this. So, in case any of you don't know how tracing works, and just very, very quick thing, then what happens is that the virus, COVID-19, then you get symptoms, and then only a few % actually infect others before they develop symptoms. According to the WHO, I know that people who say the opposite using models, but the models aren't very convincing in my mind. If you actually look at the actual data, especially since they clashed with the actual data, if you look at actual data for Singapore, for instance, then only 6.4% of a very careful analysis of case by case of all the transmissions were before symptoms started. Now, if you've got very symptoms, but they're just not very obviously COVID-19, then you do get some transmission, a fair bit of transmission at that point. But this is why we can stop it so easily. And there are lots of asymptomatic cases, but the asymptomatic cases, we now know from antibodies, they do exist. They don't infect anyone. They don't seem to infect anyone. Very different from flu. Maybe because they don't cough and sneeze. For some reason, even though they produce lots of virus, they don't seem to infect people. So for some reason it's just not coming up and out in the right way. So the tracing, so what happens is that you find someone who has got the symptoms, then they develop a disease, then you say, okay, you've got to isolate, and you isolate them. Everyone knows about that now. Then you find all their contacts and you quarantine them. And you very quickly find the contacts. Contact is someone that you have talked to for a long time, maybe 15 minutes, close to close, within a meter. Then that would count as a contact. But it's much more, or if it's very close contact, like kissing or something like that. But even then, most people who are contacts don't get it. You even get couples, and it's very common for a couple, one person doesn't infect the other. So, once you've got the symptoms, then immediately isolate, because it's very likely that you have not infected anyone, not even your partner, at that point. And then you find all the contacts, and you isolate them, and many of them, some of them, won't even have had symptoms yet. Some will be in 3 days before symptoms, when it's possible for a few to infect others. So you find those too. And so that's the idea of tracing, and that's the idea of isolating. And this works very well for Ebola, And it doesn't work for flu, because flu is airborne, little droplets that you come out. If you just go, then you can infect someone else with flu. You can't do that with COVID-19 unless you really shout. Is the best way to infect someone. Go very close up and shout to them very loud. I wonder if that's why it's in the care homes that, lots of people shouting up close to other old people. But shouting and singing, that's the sort of thing that causes it. Most of all. So anyway, the United States has hugely ramped up on the tracing. And that is why, and these countries are putting millions of dollars into tracing, and that is why we get this sudden change of direction. Virginia was an example. They put a huge amount of money into tracing since the beginning of June, and that's why it's going down. Because that's the reason, even though it's easing the lockdown. So what that means is, instead of separating everyone from everyone else, you are now just separating people who are infected from the ones who are not. So you can gradually open up society, because the people in society who are not infected are not going to infect each other. So long as you can find nearly everyone. Now you don't need to find everyone. If you at the moment, if you don't do any lockdown and anything else, then one person will infect 2, which will infect 4, which will infect 8. It's obviously going to very quickly escalate. But if you do the very good contact tracing, it will go the other way. New Zealand got down to 0.48, that's less than half. So that way then you have 8 people, would infect 4 people, would infect 2 people, would infect 1 people, and there it's gone. So you can go down pretty much as fast as you went up. And you can see that West Virginia is actually going down faster than it went up. Right at the early stage, it seems to be going down pretty fast at the moment. If it continues like that, it's not going to go a straight line, it's going to follow off. But if you imagine July, August, there will hardly any cases a day left. And here's another one, Illinois, and you can see it gradually curving down a bit. As long as they keep up with the tracing, and they do very rigorous tracing. Now, tracing is not easy, because the tracers have got to be very well trained. That's one of the problems in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure if we have trained our tracers properly, because they've got to explain to the people, they're human beings, they've got to understand why they're tracing, why they're isolating, and why you want their contacts to isolate. If that's not explained properly, then they may refuse to isolate. We're getting quite a high rate of refusals in the United Kingdom, and I think the reason is because the contact tracers are not being properly trained. The Johns Hopkins University in the United States has a very good training program for contact tracers, and the United Kingdom should use that program in my view, because they've gone through and worked it out with people who are very good at the sociology and understanding and the human communications and things. Experts in human communications have worked on this and helped to work out the best way for contact tracers to talk to the people who've got the disease, to help them to understand what to do and how to do it, and to support them as they do it. So, anyway, United States is doing it right. New York, these have got the contact tracers, they've got these proper contact tracers trained by the Johns Hopkins University online courses, and they are doing it properly in New York. And as we see, many other states are, and they're not necessarily Republicans or Democrat. The main thing isn't whether you've got a Republican or Democrat governor, it is whether you have done proper contact tracing. Now, very sadly, Texas, which is one of the worst, they have run into a big glitch. The Texans spent $295 million. They paid that to a firm which is basically a fake, it's a small firm, hardly anyone's heard of. And the CEO put up a fake profile in which he said he got a doctorate when he hadn't. So this is a big scandal in Texas, and there's bipartisan support for a proposal to terminate the contract. There are various other kind of red flags, but that was the final straw that, if he claiming to have a doctorate and he doesn't have. All he did was studied for a doctorate and he didn't get it. A bit like me, I studied for a doctorate and didn't get it, but I don't go around telling people I've got a doctorate. So anyway, but this chap does go around telling people he's got a doctorate. That's wrong. And so I thought that's a big red flag. So, that's very complicated. I explained why. You can look up in my. I've got an explanation of why I didn't get my doctorate. It was a long story. I don't want to go into it now. It was basically an academic disagreement thing, where my supervisor agreed that with my research, but the people who examined me didn't, and my supervisor told me, well, if they failed the doctorate, that I should try and get a doctorate by research, by publishing papers, but I never got around to doing that. Anyway, so long, complicated story. That's a short answer, and so there wasn't any way forward really to finish the doctorate. And I've got these papers, but I never got around to trying to publish them because I got rather depressed and about it all, and so I went on and did other stuff. Anyway, that's that. Anyway, so back to this. So more to the contact tracing. So I had a nice video you can watch. I'm not going to do it now. I've more or less explained. Is there anything else I need to talk about? I said the aim of lockdown is to find the virus. You need to isolate people from their household. So the big mistake they're doing in the United States, the United Kingdom, they're doing it right in the United States. The United Kingdom, then people not being isolated from their household. Remember I told you that if you've got someone's partner, if you're sick, your partner probably hasn't been infected yet. And absolutely, if you explain this to the people properly, anyone who's got COVID-19, their top priority, one of the first things that they worry about, if you are contact traced and you contact someone who's got COVID-19, the first thing they worry about is who else have they infected. And so if you follow the WHO recommendations, then you will say to someone who's isolating, who's at home in their household, they say to them, you have probably not yet infected your partner or your loved ones, and you need to isolate from them right away. And they're not doing that in the United Kingdom. I think that's appalling. And in other countries, in Italy, in the United States, in New Zealand, I'm not sure quite, or if it's difficult to find the details, but they isolate during hotels, separate hotels where everyone in the hotel is someone who's got COVID-19. So you don't need to worry about infecting other people. And people in the hotel, they isolate inside their rooms as well. And so they're isolated from the hotel workers, of course, very careful not to get it or to give it to these people if they've got it. And so that's what we should be doing. And then you only isolate, and I think that's probably why in the United Kingdom so many of the people in deprived areas have much more deaths, because they're much more crammed up into small rooms and small households, much more difficult to isolate from the rest of the household. And they should be isolated. And the UK advice is inadequate anyway. It doesn't tell you that the carer and the person being cared for should both be wearing masks. And it doesn't go into all details about how you should do it. But if you've got a bigger, more luxurious house, you've got more room to isolate the person who's got COVID-19 from the rest of the household, and given that it's actually quite difficult to spread anyway, then you can probably reduce the spread quite a bit. But if you're in a cramped house with lots of people and shared rooms and you can't really get away from each other, then it's going to be much harder in a deprived area to isolate the rest of the household. So that's surely got to be a factor there. And so you should want to isolate, and I think it's appalling that the United Kingdom is not listening to the WHO, not even researching into this as to whether it's necessary. And you also need the correct isolation period. So the United Kingdom is very strange, but it'd be okay in the United States. If you're in the United States, none of this is happening. I'm just going off in a bit of a rant about the United Kingdom, but you're doing it right in the United States. You are isolating people from their household, and if I understand right, and you are doing a proper isolation period. You're doing 10 days, at least 10 days. WHO are much more cautious. They say 14 days after symptoms cease. Especially if you've got a small number of cases. Why only isolate them for 7 days? So Chris and Matt Hancock, he came out of isolation after 7 days. So you had an extra 3 days when the SAGE group themselves know that the person is still infectious. They say in their minutes, they discuss it and they say, we know that the infectious period is longer than for flu, which is 5 to 7 days, 5 days for adults, 7 days for children. But in their models, if you use a 7-day isolation period, and the SAGE group find, which are mostly modelers, 7 of them are modelers, then they found that with a 7-day isolation period, it had almost the same effect as a 14-day isolation period. So that's why they're telling everyone. They don't actually give the reason. They don't actually explain. They've just got 1 minute, 7 minutes, which says that if it's 7 days, you get this, and if you've got 14 days, you've got this. Another set of minutes that says that so it doesn't make much difference which you choose according to models. You've got another set of minutes that says that it could be up to 2 weeks for COVID-19 from symptoms. If it's like others, like SARS and other diseases, and it could be more than that if it's not a mild disease. And then they just say that they're going to choose 7 days. They don't explain why. It's like, I didn't look at every minute. And they're missing something. I don't think they understand the ethics of it. That people want to protect their family. And they want to know what the proper isolation period is to be sure that they're not going to infect anyone in their household. They don't want an isolation period that'll nearly always work. That'll work often enough to be indistinguishable in the model, in that you'll still only have 100 to 200 people cases a day instead of thousands, because you've isolated for 7 days. But the extra 10, 20, 30 cases are real people. So anyway, so that's my thing. And then the quarantine period is the same with everyone, except in Bhutan, where it's 21 days, because they have managed to keep it completely out. I'll talk about it in a separate video. So anyway, that's the bit I talked about at the beginning, and it's at the end of this, but how Chinese pioneered it all, and that we owe so much to them, really. And this is about how it's not transmitted by aerosols. So this is how you protect yourself. So the good news also is that you can protect yourself from COVID-19 and much more easily than flu. So if you follow these instructions and you still get something, it's probably going to be flu, because you can't get flu out in the same way. So if you've got to keep a distance, and the WHO say 1 metre, and 2 metres is being especially careful, wash your hands thoroughly, get out of the habit of touching your eyes, nose or mouth, and that's it. And there are several other things. On the WHO website they explain a bit more detail about that. I'll link to that now. So anyway, I hope this video will help you a little bit, be a little bit less scared in the United States. Many other countries have done the same before. Several of your states are doing the right thing. And some of you are not doing it right yet, such as Texas. And the problem usually is people are not doing the contact tracing right. And that's the problem, really. Do the contact tracing right, and you can ease out of lockdown and get back to a much more normal situation. And in the United Kingdom too, and I'm sure we're going to gradually find these things. We're just taking so long, and we're quite a bit behind the United States in that respect of actually catching up. We're playing catch up. We're only gradually learning, and they're going to have to learn how to do contact tracing properly, and gradually realise how important it is. And then we're going to be able to do what all the other countries are doing. And then if you're in Latin America, then it takes you longer. Then you're a bit behind us. And especially in Brazil, and they don't seem to have got the message yet in the government level. And so just hope that they do sometime soon, because it's very important to sort this out. If you need help with any of this, then I've got my Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked. Oh, I touched my face, but I didn't touch my eyes. You know, that's okay if you really... Anyway, I'm not actually... There's no chance I've got COVID-19 in my face, my fingers anyway. If you're indoors and you haven't done anything, and then it's okay to do that sort of stuff. If you haven't had any contact with anyone with COVID-19, then your house is a safe zone. You can wash your hands and wash the surfaces, so long as you're not bringing it in to your house. Anyway, I'll stop that.